Welcome to BizTech's Leadership Conversation show. Now, we talk about Honeywell today. It's a Fortune 100 company that invents and manufactures technologies to address tough challenges linked to global macro trends such as safety, security, and energy. Today, we speak to Norm Gilsdorf. He's the Senior Vice President for High Growth Regions and the President for Honeywell ASEAN. Now, he's going to give us insights into the company and its role in accelerating the sustainability agenda. Now, Norm, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Now, Norm, could you start by giving us a broad overview of Honeywell and the various business segments that it's in?
Well, Honeywell's what you call a multi-industrial company. If you look at our major segments that we're in, aerospace is a big one, whether it be business jets, commercial, or defense. Almost anything that flies has something from Honeywell on it. And then you've got buildings where the fire systems, the building management, access, security, movements, almost anything in a building is Honeywell. Then we've got a segment we call performance materials, which is a lot of oil and gas. So this is the technology, the automation, the controls, the catalyst. And we actually produce some of our own chemicals and products. We're the biggest producer of refrigerants in the world. So we have that segment. And then we have a segment where it's kind of warehousing and e-retail, where handheld scanners and printers and things that warehouses or e-retailers or even delivery folks have. So, but within that business, we're a leading producer of personal protection equipment. So we go from the masks that we wore during COVID to helping with ventilators and suits and helmets and the like. So very diverse company, very diverse industries, aerospace, industrial, warehousing, and buildings.
Now, as you said, it's a very diverse portfolio of products and services and verticals as well. But what are your focus areas in the Asia Pacific region and the Middle East?
Well, we actually focus on all those areas, but let me kind of boil it down a little bit to kind of the bigger ones. Obviously, aerospace is big in both of those regions. Commercial air travel, business jets, that's a big focus area. Both regions are well known for having some very big and important airlines. Buildings, both regions are well known for developing now smart cities, lots of building of new infrastructure, complex buildings, stadiums, hotels, the like. So buildings continues to be a big focus for us. And then obviously the energy business. We've got oil and gas, whether it be upstream, midstream, or downstream, or petrochemicals. Again, that's a main area of focus. So I would say it's those three. But what I see going forward is you're going to start to see more in the area of warehousing and e-retail and supply chain and those things. So again, all four, but the big ones are aerospace, oil and gas, buildings.
Now, Norm, you brought up some very interesting segments that I'm going to drill down on later. But first, I need to ask you about sustainability, because that's now front and center in terms of focus in boardrooms across the world. Could you share with us how this plays a role in your company's strategy as an industrial giant and how it's differed in the last decade?
Well, very good question. Well, first of all, sustainability is right in the center of what we do. And it's been actually for a very long time. Lots of people sometimes don't realize that we were the ones that invented the catalytic converter that went on cars back in the 70s. And we actually developed technology to make the unleaded gasoline that was able to be used with the catalytic converter. We've made the clean diesel fuel that was used and developed the technology to actually create it. And low global warming refrigerants, we've been the inventor and creator of that for a long time. And CO2 removal, we've had that technology to capture CO2, which we were using in the oil and gas industry for 50, 60 years or more. So we have a long history of participating and being a leader in sustainability. But also when you look at our technologies, about 60–70% of it relates to energy, energy management, energy movement, energy storage. And as you all know, energy is directly related to sustainability. So again, it's been a big part of our company's DNA for a very long time. Today, it's right at the forefront, where we have technologies across the board that are helping our customers drive sustainability, whether it be digitalization, which we'll talk about. There's a big relationship between digitalization and sustainability, CO2 capture, plastics recycling, the continued use of refrigerants, sustainable aviation fuel. We were the pioneer of sustainable aviation fuel using biofuels, renewable materials as fuels. So we've had it in our DNA, and it's front and center with everything we do today.
Okay, so here's the thing, Norm, however, when a lot of companies think of sustainability, they associate it with cost, whereas you have that in terms or increased cost either to their customers or they're having to pay more for factor inputs. You are a company that, as you just mentioned, has DNA, sustainability in its DNA. How do you then build a culture that embraces sustainability and also debunks the myth that basically sustainability is expensive for business?
Well, I think it starts with you've got to have sustainability goals for your own company. And because we're a producer of chemicals, we're a producer of a lot of different things, we ourselves have to set aggressive sustainability targets. And we've set that 2035 carbon neutral. But we actually started on this journey, I think it's 15 years ago now. In the last 15 years, we've reduced 90% of our carbon emissions. We've done that kind of reduction. We've done that through all sorts of programs, tens of thousands of projects and programs and investment to reduce our carbon footprint, to reduce our water usage, to reduce our energy usage. So we bought in that we're going to operate many years ago as a sustainable company within ourselves. So it starts there. I think that gets everybody on board. That gets everybody thinking sustainability is when they go to work and for the day. And then the second thing you do is with our R&D culture, with our commercial group, with our product management folks, we get them connected in early that we're going to have to help our customers on this journey. And that's our role as a technology company, is to be there to solve problems for our customers. And as we saw this becoming a customer problem, then we had to bring that in ourselves and said, well, that means it's our problem. That means we're going to help them solve it. But as you said, most companies look at this as a cost. We have to find ways to do it so it's not a cost, or at least it's minimal cost. It's part of what they're going to normally do as part of the way they operate or the way they improve. So a lot of the things we've done are just part of improving their overall performance, but they can get sustainability along with it.
So Norm, give us some examples of how you've helped your customers achieve a more sustainable future using your solutions. I read about, for example, something you've done in Asia with the Malaysian national oil company Petronas in the energy business. But could you give us some examples, perhaps in Asia as well as the Middle East, of how you've helped your customers?
So let's start and let's bring in maybe a little bit of the subject of digitalization. We've been on a digitalization journey for quite a while now, many years, many companies. But when you think about it, digitalization, which is at the core of Honeywell, because we're a company that makes sensors, we do automation, we integrate, and we have software. And so, okay, how does that all come together around sustainability? Well, when you think about sustainability, you first have to measure what is it that you're producing or emitting. Then you need to visualize it and report it. Then you need to control it, and then you need to optimize it. Well, when you think about it, digitalization does that. It measures, it visualizes, it helps you control, and with software, you can optimize it. So the digitalization solutions we bring to our customers, whether it be in the energy industry, the aerospace industry, warehousing, and others, they help them drive their sustainability objectives. So that's one example. And part of the recent work with Petronas is around digitalization to help them obviously optimize, improve efficiency of their enterprises. We do the same in the Middle East with big companies like ADNOC and Aramco. Then the other thing we're doing is CO2 capture, because as gas comes out of the ground, or as you start to produce hydrogen, which is being talked about a lot, particularly if it's blue hydrogen, you need to remove the CO2. And again, Petronas has a massive program to basically be capturing CO2 and be able to then put it away in storage in safe places, put it back in the ground. Same with companies here in the Middle East. So CO2 capture, the creation of blue hydrogen, that's another area. And then the other one that I think is very interesting today is sustainable aviation fuel, where we've been working with customers particularly in Southeast Asia, to put in projects that develop sustainable aviation fuel. So this is fuel that comes from waste oils, cooking oils, even today now getting into waste from trees and lumber and various other forms of biomaterial that can be converted into a very good jet fuel that in essence has very little, it's completely bio-produced from a bio raw material. It's very efficiently made. It can be made with green or blue hydrogen, which makes it very, very low emission level, and give that to, provide that to the airline. So sustainable aviation fuel, CO2 capture, digitalization, and then the last but not least is plastics recycling. We have technology that enables almost all plastics to be recycled. And by the way, this just doesn't mean burning them to energy. This means taking the plastics and putting them and rearranging the molecules and feeding them back and making new plastics right back through the same industrial processes that made the plastic the first time.
So again, just using that as an example, basically that's taking recycling to the whole circular economy perspective. Correct. Of making sure that basically it goes back into the manufacturing process. But because aviation is so important to Honeywell, I want to zoom in on sustainable aviation. What does the future look like? Because the international and regional aviation groups have basically pledged zero emissions by 2050, which for an average person, that seems completely an unrealistic target. Tell us about what sustainable aviation looks like.
Yeah, a very good question. And so there's several parts to this. And actually the airlines, and we've been working with them for years, have been on this journey for a bit of a while. Let's start with the simplest of things. Map the routes that the planes fly, but from point A to point B as efficiently as possible so that you minimize any fuel. Map the routes on the runway. By the way, planes sit on runways for a long time. They get parked. We do the runway lighting, the runway software to map out and optimize the use of runways. A good example in Changi, in Singapore. That's our system, again, to help manage that. So keep the planes running with minimum engines on the ground. Do the same in the air. Get the safest, most direct routes. Secondly, sustainable aviation fuel. We have over 18 units around the world, either operating or in the process of being built and start up to make sustainable aviation fuel. And even in ASEAN, when you look at Pertamina has two projects to actually take waste oil and turn it into sustainable aviation fuel. And we sense there's going to be quite a few more in the region because the region is got good feedstock to be able to provide sustainable aviation fuel. And that obviously is going to reduce emissions significantly. Then you get to the next part of the journey, which is having more efficient planes, having lighter planes, lighter materials on planes. That's been ongoing and that's going to continue ongoing. And then ultimately, what we're looking at are electric driven planes. Obviously, when you look at the unmanned vehicles, they're going to become electric driven, or the small, planes, you can get to electric. And then you've seen from the airlines the look now of hydrogen as a fuel. And we're looking at, how to design engines and APUs for hydrogen when we get to that hydrogen economy. So I think it's going to be efficiency, sustainable aviation fuel, new engine technology, new fuels, better use of electric. All that's going to drive this whole aviation sector to be sustainable and meet their goals.
And you see this obviously as a combination rather than the panacea, which is basically electric aircraft or something similar.
Exactly. It's going to be step by step. And I think, by the way, you mentioned it, you alluded to a good point there. It takes a partnership here because you've got the airlines, you've got the suppliers of components to airlines, companies like obviously Honeywell, and then you've got the producers of fuel, whether it be sustainable aviation fuel, whether it be hydrogen. We've all got to work together to solve this problem. In fact, sustainability, a lot of it is about all of us working together. It's different businesses partnering up. It's customers and suppliers working together. Like, again, we've been doing with the customers in ASEAN, creating different linkages and partnerships so that we together are working on these problems.
And just to add a little bit to that, basically companies like yourselves working with your customers and they working within their own supply chains themselves basically then contributes to this overall ecosystem of sustainability, because that's where in the past we've fallen short. The supply chain sometimes basically is a very inefficient supply chain from an energy and sustainability perspective.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think you raised a good point. Let's take the example of sustainable aviation fuel. With traditional aviation fuel, the oil companies, they had the oil, they refined the oil into jet fuel, and they could give it to the airlines. When you look now at sustainable aviation fuel, we've got to collect waste oil or food oils or bio waste or waste material from lumber industries or whatever. That's a whole different industry as the feedstock supplier. And we have to now bring them together with the refining industry, which has the technology to turn it into the. So now we've got a different whole supply chain to be able to bring that solution. So you hit a very important point there. We're going to have new partnerships, new linkages to solve this.
Now, Norm, I'm going to segue into your other business that you talked about, really the emerging business for Honeywell, supply chain and e-commerce, because obviously that's been accelerated in terms of the business because of the pandemic. Tell us a little bit more about that business and what Honeywell is doing there.
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, we've actually been in that business for a fairly long time, but what's interesting is regions like ASEAN and the Middle East, they're really accelerating now their whole embracing of this. So, okay, what does this mean? So we provide the materials that, the handheld scanners, the handheld printers, the warehouse automation, the warehouse control systems to kind of keep this whole supply chain moving efficiently. And what did we see in ASEAN with COVID, I think was very interesting, and it was even new to me that people previously ate out a lot of their meals, quick meals here and there. With COVID, you couldn't do that. In fact, it's kind of an interesting story when talking to my team, what did you do during COVID? So many of them said, well, I learned how to cook. I said, what do you mean you learned how to cook? Well, these are the men or the women. And well, we ate out all the time. So now we had to redo our kitchen and learn how to cook. Well, they were taking in delivery food. They were getting it from grocery stores or they were getting to go. And then you start looking, well, it turns out the whole food industry's changed. There's the need for cold storage, more warehousing, food closer to the end users, delivery closer to the end users. Because remember, the whole delivery business is about speed, efficiency, quickness. You go to that because you want something quickly, whether it be food or even whether it be a package. Well, we're there to help those industries automate, be fast, be efficient, be quick, because they're distributing now out broadly throughout the region. I look just at Malaysia. I've talked to some companies there. They're building many more warehouses. The whole cold chain, how to keep food fresh and cold, people learning about use of frozen food, getting that again close to customers. How do you warehouse? How do you move? How do you store? How do you keep it the right temperature? So I think there's going to be a lot happening there. That's gonna be a big opportunity for the whole region as kind of the whole environment of how you deliver and use changes.
And Norm, I want to add a little bit more to that. With all the talk about food security now, that then opens a plethora of different options, because if you look at places like Singapore, which suddenly now finds that it doesn't have 33% of its fresh chicken supply out of Malaysia because exports have been banned, multi-sourcing and therefore extending the supply chains to new markets is going to be a big factor.
Absolutely. Nope, you're absolutely right. And then being sure when it comes from new markets or new locations, is the quality been maintained? Is it been kept at the right temperature? How long has it traveled? And just, you think about this re-logistics. I'm sure Singapore already had a great route of chickens to Singapore. If you start bringing in other countries, well, how do you get it through the port faster? Is it been kept at the right temperature? Can you trust the supplier? Is it the right, has it been protected and done the right quality? Halal food has to have very special controls. Is it been kept in this environment? So that whole monitoring, tagging, following, that's going to be an important part of keeping this security very good for the food supply. So very interesting area.
Norm, it's been a really fascinating conversation, and I learned a lot about Honeywell. But I want to now zoom in on you. You've been at Honeywell essentially for 45 years. Tell us about your journey and what are some of the leadership lessons that you can perhaps impart with some of our audience?
Well, it's been a very interesting journey. I've lived in 5 different countries. I've had probably 16 or 17, big jobs in different parts of the business. I started on the oil and gas side in refineries and petrochemical plants, and then went into technology, catalysts and absorbents, and was even in R&D for a while. Then I went and ran the automation business for Honeywell, the process solutions. In the last 11 years, I've been doing all the businesses in this high growth region market. So it's been an exciting, interesting journey, and I've obviously learned a lot. So some lessons learned. First of all, you have to learn to deal with ambiguity. Particularly when you work in all the markets I've worked in, things can happen and you just have to deal with them. Have patience, diversity, diversity of thought, diversity of individuals, diversity of nationalities, background. To me, that's fundamentally critical, because the more ideas I can get from more diverse backgrounds, the better solution I can get. Whether I'm developing a solution within Honeywell, we're a very diverse organization, it's a huge enabler, or whether I'm working on a customer problem, having those diverse ideas. So always have a diverse team. And then obviously have some fun, but at the end of the day, it's about solving problems for customers. And that's been my focus from the beginning. I'm here to solve problems for customers, and that's sort of what gets me excited in the morning.
Now, thank you very much for coming on the show. But before you leave us, any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think, the whole world's on this journey for sustainability, and, we've all got to work together. And it's a partnership between all of us to get there, and it's important for all of us to succeed. So let's work together on it. Let's leverage some of what we've got, whether it be digitalization or technology or just better collaboration and partnership. But we as Honeywell are here to support you and help you, and we're all in this together.
Now, we've been speaking to Norman Gilsdorf, the president for Honeywell for ASEAN, as well as senior vice president of high growth regions. Now, I'm Brian Fernandez on BizTech's Leadership Conversation Show. Check out www.biztech.asia for business and technology conversations. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thank you very much for tuning in.